So in the homework problems, there's a number of problems where you have to decide how demand and supply are shifting. And once they shift, you have to decide what is the effect on the equilibrium price. Now, some of these are harder than others, and so I wanted to just go through sort of the process that I would use to tackle these types of problems. And so where I start is to first figure out how a shift in demand affects the equilibrium price and quantity, separately how a shift in supply, and with that information I can combine them when two curves shift and always figure out what's going to happen. So let's start with demand. And all I want to do is work out when the demand curve shifts, what happens to the equilibrium price and quantity. So here this market starts off in equilibrium, P1 and Q1, and let's say that demand increases. Well, our new equilibrium point where demand crosses supply implies a higher price and a higher quantity. So when demand increases, the price goes up and the quantity goes up. If demand were to decrease, the price will decrease and the quantity will decrease. Demand goes down, price decrease, quantity decrease. So that's just a basic shift in demand. Supply, we draw shifts in supply here. Typically involve opposing effects for demand and price and quantity. So here's the quantity, here's the price. If supply increases, shifts to the right, that's going to decrease the price but increase the quantity. The price goes down, the quantity goes up. If supply decreases, shifts to the left, the price goes up but the quantity goes down. Now, I did those pretty quickly, and so I would encourage you, in fact, it's really important when you work on these, to draw these out yourself. So they're only going to sort of remain in your memory if you spend the time to draw these out. And when you work on problems, on the homework and the exams, drawing out your answers on a separate sheet of paper is going to go a long way to making sure you don't make sort of silly mistakes trying to work these out in your head. Okay, so the advantage is now I know if demand shifts to the left or right, what happens to the price and quantity? Same for supply. Now let's suppose I give you a more complicated example. So I say suppose that supply decreases and demand increases. So I've got two shifts in the curve. So let's draw the graph and see what happens. So we start in equilibrium. And we have a decrease in supply, or a shift left. And we have an increase in demand, or shift to the right. Now, looking at the graph, I can see pretty clearly that the equilibrium price has increased. But when I look at the quantity part, it's not exactly clear whether it stays the same, whether it increases or decreases, and that's because the demand and supply shifts have opposing effects. So when I'm dealing with two curves shifting, I'll make a table So I'll put demand and supply, and then the total effect here. And I'll put the price and the quantity. And then I can use the individual shift information that I have up here in order to fill out my table. So let's take the change in demand. We figured out that demand is going to increase. Well, according to this, an increase in demand causes the price to increase and the quantity to increase. They both go up. Supply. In our example, supply decreased. So I go up here and I say, okay, well, if I just was dealing with supply, a decrease in supply causes the price to go up, the quantity to go down. And so then to figure out the total effect, all I have to do is look and make sure, do they both increase or do they both decrease? If that's true, I know what happened, right? So with respect to the price, it's a plus plus a plus. Both are positive increases, so the total effect is going to be the price goes up. I know that for sure. With quantity, I don't know, right? The quantity will go up if the demand shift is bigger, but the quantity could go down if the supply shift is bigger. If they shift by the same amount, then there's no change, right? So let me just kind of write that down. In this particular example, in this case, where supply went down, demand went up. I know the price goes up for sure. The quantity depends. And I can break it up into three possibilities. A, the quantity goes up if the demand shift is bigger. Right? That's going to make the effect an increase in the price. B, the quantity. The quantity will go down if the supply shift was the bigger effect, because that's a negative on the quantity. Finally, there's no change in the quantity if the two shifts are equal. Or by the same amount. So you'll notice in the homework assignment, there's a number of questions where you're dealing with both a shift in demand and a shift in supply, and you're left to figure out what happens to the price and quantity. If you take this information up here with just the shift in demand, just the shift in supply, and form this table, you can't go wrong. Right? Now, I know it's a lot to keep track of, but once you do it a couple of times, it becomes pretty easy, right? And you draw the graph to back up the information that you're getting or came up with, and you're much less likely to make a mistake or go wrong. So good luck with those homework problems. Some of them are harder than others, and in some cases, I kind of left it to you to figure out whether demand or supply was shifting or both. Right? So some of them you have to do some work to decide which curve shifts and in which direction. And once you've figured that out, you can use this sort of rubric for attacking the problem.